Our reading today is from the Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Dogmatism versus common sense. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 7, Jesus warns, "Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them." Jesus here, as indeed many times during his teaching, counsels people to use their God-given common sense and not to rely on high-flown but undemonstrable claims. Common sense goes beyond abstract reasoning, for it is rooted in actual experience. Even common sense, however, is deficit when the judgment called for goes beyond sensory experience. Ultimately, what he emphasized always, therefore, was intuitive perception. Thus, he expected more of his disciples than crude common sense, and often scolded them for being too literal-minded, as he did elsewhere, when they thought his statement, "I have meat to eat which you know not of," meant that he had steaks or sandwiches secreted about his person. His reference, of course, was to spiritual, not material substance. Words, even though appearing in the scriptures, are no substitute for direct perception of truth. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita says in the 2nd chapter, "The sage who knows God has little need for scriptures, as one might have for a pond when the whole land is covered in flood." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Thank you. Good morning. An interesting topic, and I'm not going to talk about it. I want to talk about this. We had a ceremony last night, an event last night, celebrating the passage of Yogananda and the passage of Yukteswar, the Mahasamadhi of each of these great ones. This is the conscious exit from the body, the knowing that their mission was finished and they would disappear into spirit and be very present, of course, with all of us. And so last night, this also represents, as you can see, many, many other great ones who have made the journey toward self-realization. And several years ago, Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, suggested that when we got to Yogananda's birthday on January 5th, we focus our attention on his life specifically. But when we got to the March 7th of his Mahasamadhi and March 9th of his Guru's Mahasamadhi, that we take a look at many of the saints who have made this journey, because this is the journey that we're all on. This is the journey that we are making. And on Friday night, we had many people speak of different ones of these. And the vibration in the room was so powerful And I think the reason was that as each person spoke, they really brought through the saint that they were speaking of. We could all very much feel Anandamoy Ma. We could feel Saint Anthony of the Desert. We could feel Ramakrishna. We could certainly feel Yogananda and Yukteswar, who are standing here together. And so it was very hard to leave the room. And all weekend, as I tried to focus on dogmatism versus common sense, I just found myself here. And so I think actually it works for two reasons. One is that the reading on forgiveness is a very wonderful one in celebrating Yukteswar's conscious passage, which is celebrated today. This is the actual day, March 9th. Because Yukteswar is the one that reminded us that we have all done everything. There is no way in which we have any right to judge others. And because we've all done the very same thing that we see in front of us that we perhaps don't like. There's no way we can get away with that. We cannot be self-righteous and think we can look at another person and say, wow, are they messing up? Because we've all done it. We've done exactly the same thing. And the only reason we're not doing it now is because we learned a hard lesson. And so that statement of forgiveness, Yukteswar said, every man's path is, filled with dark things. But make the spiritual effort now. That's the whole story. We just keep going. And so we learn lessons and then we get other ones to learn. And then we handle those and we get other ones to learn. And if we haven't handled it just right, we get it again. And so it's constant. And we have all of these friends to help us. So the phrase in the Bhagavad Gita saying that the sage who knows God has little need of scriptures as a pond when the whole land is full of water. This is the whole land full of water. These have found their way, and they speak to us of our possibilities. Each one of these saints is a portrait of us. I found a little book. Well, it was just fun how I found this little book. When I was moving from one apartment to the next several years ago, I had to cut down on my book collection. One of the hardest things for me to do. And of course it always grows again, and then I have to cut it down, and then it grows again. But I was thinking that I was going to be really good about this. I wasn't. I still kept buying books. But Celeste came to help with part of the process, because she was moving also. It was a big 5-way move. And so I had taken all the books I wanted out of my bookcase, and I said, take what you wish. And several days ago, Celeste apparently was cleaning out her bookshelf, because Carol came home from the thrift store with about 4 little St. Francis books. And I said, these look familiar. But as is the case, I have a lot of books on my bookshelf that I haven't read yet. So there was this sweet little one by Maisie Ward called Saints in Pictures, and this one was St. Francis. It's a tiny little tattered old book. What an incredible book. I've read actually 7 or 8 books about St. Francis, but never quite got the perspective that she has. It was just delightful. And she said something that she was quoting from Chesterton, and I guess Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, has written a book on Francis, which I haven't read. But she said, is this quote, this is what Chesterton said, besides interpreting Francis by the light of the Gospels, we can interpret the Gospels by the light of Francis. Now, that actually works with the subject matter of today, so maybe I am talking about it. we can interpret the Gospels by the light of Francis because he had the courage to live as Christ suggested. And it was so shocking to the churchmen when he went to the Pope to try to get his order accepted. But they actually had to stop themselves. You know, this is crazy. This can't be done. You can't live so poorly. This isn't right. And then one of them realized, but this is the life that Christ suggested. And here's a man who wants to do it. We can't really say, no, this won't look good. And so they gave him permission to try that order. And you know, there are still people today. There are still little communities of people who live the gospel according to St. Francis. They have the wherewithal to try it. And what they find is great, great joy. It's not reasonable for most of us, but we have been given the tools for living the life of inner renunciation. And that's the path we follow from Yogananda. Chesterton also said an interesting thing. It's not a new idea, but it's just the way it was put. He said, the founder of Christianity found the honest man inside the thief and promised him paradise. That's another wonderful statement about forgiveness. Christ found the inner man inside the thief and promised him paradise. This is what all the great ones do. They see into the deep part of ourselves, which is that shining soul, being asked to come into this world and play the game in the right way. And they are here for us. Their presence is palpable. They are our friends. They will gather around us in any troubles that we are facing. They are absolutely real and present. And on Friday night and on each Sunday, we can tune into that presence when there are so many of us gathered here that know that. There's a whole part of us that maybe fights it, but there's a whole part of it that knows it. And in that knowing of each one of us, we bring that presence into the room. There's another interesting story from the book on Francis, where one of the monks, eventually as the order grew, different people had different ideas, and they kind of wanted to get back to having things that they used to have as part of the church. So one of the young monks asked for a psalter. I don't know what a psalter is. Someone will have to tell me after service what a psalter is. But then another one asked for a breviary, and each time Francis said, no, no, no. He said, I can just see the time will come when you will be sitting on a high seat and you will ask a servant to go get you a breviary. Apparently it's a book of service. It's a book of how things go. It's a book of how to do it. And he just wouldn't have it. I heard another story by a very, very interesting man who is a professor of creativity and very interested in what's happening with the education system these days. And a teacher told him that in a drawing class, she went over to a young girl who was drawing a picture and said to her, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher sort of disapprovingly said, nobody knows what God looks like." And the child said, "They will in a minute." That's the attitude to have. And Saint Anthony, who is one of the saints we spoke of on Friday night. He spent so much time in solitude. His way, his particular way, we all have a particular way. We all have a very particular path within a path. And his way was to just get away from it all. But when he got away from it all, he received it all within himself. And when there was a controversy in the church about whether Christ was divine or just a man, who did they go and find after many, many years, 60 years or so in solitude? They still knew that Anthony was out there in that Egyptian tomb, getting as far away from the influence of the world as he could. And they asked him, please, please, to come and help the church deal with this controversy. And just by the vibration that he carried, just by the consciousness that he held, just by the love with which he was filled, he said these words, I have seen him. Personal testimony. Personal testimony. Ramakrishna took a very interesting route. He experienced every religion. He experienced it as a practitioner within himself. He became a Sikh, a Sufi, a Christian. He was a Hindu. And within each of those sadhanas that he practiced with great enthusiasm, he reached bliss. He reached unity. And the vibration that came from him drew people from all over the world. He rarely made a trip out of the temple at Dakshineshwar, but the whole world came to him because he knew deeply that the search for God was the search for God within each of those religions, and the foolishness of the fighting and the bickering. He just wanted to give that message. It's all heading in the direction of that light. And that's what you want more than anything. So again, Scripture, what book we use to understand is just a moment in time when someone had an inspiration, an understanding of what could be done, what were the keys to finding God, and they wrote it down. But that inspiration is ever present. That Scripture was written in one moment, and we can draw from that inspiration. But there are continuing moments. There are continuing ways in which each of us, our Scripture here, we follow the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Our Scripture is actually the autobiography of a yogi. And what a wonderful thing, because what is that book? It's a book of experience. It's a book that each of us have read. For me, when I read it, I said, finally, I can do this too. I wanted so badly to do what the great Christian saints had done, to do what the Teresas had done. But there was never any indication that that was possible. And when I read the autobiography, it said, you too can find this within yourself. That was so thrilling. And that's our Scripture. And that's what's happening here. Each of these great ones testifies and shows through the experience of their own lives, through the vibration of their being, through the omnipresence of their being, through their availability to us even now. You know, so much of what we deal with is the unseen. That's very interesting. And that certainly doesn't allow for any dogma. The unseen is what we're dealing with for so much of what we do. And so what we need to do is rely on our intuition, our divine perception, the possibility that we can receive inspiration this day, this week, this month for how to move ahead. We ended the evening on Friday evening. Rashmi read Yogananda's poem, When I Am Only a Dream, and it reminded me that in the early years, after I found Ananda, very early years, because I found Ananda in the early 70s, the phrase that I plucked out for my own special sadhana and put in a little frame with a picture of Master was a phrase from that poem, and it was, "Unknown, I will walk by your side and guard you with invisible arms."